I'm running for president because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think President Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad.
Welcome back to America Decides. Mike Pence is still looking to break through the crowded Republican Party field. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump, his former boss, maintains a commanding lead as he faces a possible indictment in the January 6th investigation. Earlier, I spoke with Marc, who's an advisor to Pence and who also served as his chief of staff while he was vice president. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks for having me.
I want to start off with this target letter that Donald Trump has received from the Department of Justice. You also testified in front of the grand jury in this case. What do you make of this case and him being apparently receiving this target letter?
Well, I'm not sure that many of us know what to make of it until we actually get to see the expected indictment. And then I think we'll have a much clearer view. I did testify under compulsion of subpoena, but that was a long time ago, and there's been a lot of witnesses since then, and probably, Caitlin, a lot of witnesses that candidly were a lot closer to Donald Trump to that process. People like Marc Meadows, who were advising throughout the process. Keep in mind that for the vice president in that last month, he was still leading the coronavirus task force, was traveling the country trying to encourage businesses to reopen, governments and state governments to reopen. We were doing a lot of efforts in trying to secure that Senate seat in Georgia. And so I think that the vice president knew what his responsibilities were on January 6th. And so we weren't really involved in a lot of the conversations that were happening amongst some of the outside lawyers that President Trump brought in to, I think, give him pretty bad advice.
Do you think there is a political liability for the president when it comes to this case? I mean, we've seen with the previous two indictments that people in the Republican Party have rallied around him. He continues to be the front runner for the nomination. Do you think that that has any possibility of changing?
I think that it does, but I don't think there's any doubt that so far the first couple of indictments have rallied Republican voters around President Trump. I think looking ahead into the January 6th potential indictment, I do think it's a little bit different because in this case, I don't think people relish revisiting that day and seeing the videos of what happened that day again, and reminded candidly of the president's dereliction of duty on that day.
So that's really interesting to me because you would imagine that given what you just described, all of the other candidates running for the nomination against Trump would see this as an opening. But we really haven't seen candidates take this head on besides a Chris Christie or an Asa Hutchinson who have kind of, formed their campaigns around this contrast to Trump. But, even Mike Pence has said that, he'll be held accountable for what happened that day, but he doesn't think there was a criminal charge here or that he did anything criminal illegal. Why aren't candidates kind of seizing on this
to
try to take him down?
I probably would differ with that a little bit. If you go back to Mike Pence's announcement speech on June 7th in Iowa, he addressed this very specifically and talked about his disagreement with President Trump on that day and how President Trump was wrong and how, by God's grace, he believes that what he did that day was exactly right. So I don't think he's running away from this conversation. He's actually addressed it head on. At the same time, to your point, I think he said, ultimately, I think we need to take our message to the American people, let the American people decide, as opposed to, I think, candidly, a lot of Republican voters do believe there's a two-tiered system of justice today and have a lot of skepticism about the Justice Department and which of the cases are politically motivated. And so rather than bringing a case against the president, believing that should be left to the American voters. But again, that is said, not yet seeing the indictment. And I think for many of us, we also felt that the previous indictment was politically motivated against the president on the documents. But then when you actually read the indictment, it's pretty hard to justify many of the actions of him and his team in the way that they were obstructing that investigation.
I mean, is that why we're seeing candidates kind of be reluctant to take on Trump in this regard because of what Republican voters are essentially saying, that they agree with the president?
Well, I think actually Republican voters are more incentive. They just want to talk about it anymore. They don't want to talk about January 6th. They want to be talking about, what are you going to do for me in the future? What are you going to be doing to help me? And they look at Donald Trump as somebody who came to their cause in 2016 to 2020 when he served as president and fought for many of the beliefs that they have. And so I think there is a sense of wanting to rally around him when they perceive he's in trouble. But how long that lasts and how many more indictments must he endure to continue to get that sort of support? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think anybody does.
So for Mike Pence, I mean, that also, voters are, in Iowa, as you saw, he took a question from a voter who wanted him to behave differently that day. He's had to engage on this issue over and over again. What is the path forward? Do you imagine that this remains a liability for Pence insofar as we're seeing this rallying around the former president?
Well, I'd like to think that when you uphold your oath to the Constitution, it's not really a liability. And I think that that is something that will always be a part of his legacy. But as I just mentioned, I also think voters are forward-looking. And that's why I think you've heard Mike Pence talk about, I'm proud of what our record was for those 4 years. My concern is that actually Donald Trump has drifted from that record, whether or not it's on the issue of life. And now, basically saying because of him, we basically have a negotiation table to decide which children get to live and which ones don't. He's basically walked away from entitlement spending and said, we're going to leave everything as it is, which I think will bankrupt the United States. I think there are great concerns about foreign policy, this embrace of Vladimir Putin and calling him a genius for invading Ukraine. And so I think that where Mike Pence will go is to say, I'm proud of the 4 years. My worry is that Donald Trump has actually drifted away from conservatism since the administration ended.
We have seen polling where the former vice president is polling pretty low. He hasn't reached the donor requirement yet to make the debate stage. Will he be on the debate stage in a month? Yeah, we have every confidence he'll make that debate stage. I think that for the nonprofit organization he launched, he has 130 to 140,000 donors. So some of that takes a little bit of time to transition those donors to say, here's the new cause we want you to support. But I think that Mike Pence has continued to get a lot of support from traditional conservatives. And so, yeah, we have every expectation he'll be there on August 23rd. And what evidence have you all seen on the ground in a place like Iowa that there is an appetite for this? Because when we see in polling and talking to voters, there isn't this pull towards Pence. I mean, he doesn't appear to be gaining traction. How do you make that up, and how do you see it? Well, I think that he's going to continue to take his case to traditional Republican voters, and I think that there's a lot that's still at play right now, Caitlin. I don't think any of us knows what's going to happen to Donald Trump in the course of this race. And I think that, going back to where we've been before in Iowa, whether or not it was Rick Santorum winning Iowa or Mike Huckabee, in the summer they were polling at 2, 3, 4% before they actually gained traction and won. Even Barack Obama was in the same place, honestly, when he ran against Hillary Clinton. And people forget, Donald Trump didn't win Iowa in 2016. Ted Cruz did. So I think that there's a lot still at play, and I do think it will really begin as we sort of get into this debate season. But for a former vice president, it's very different from someone who isn't as well known. He's very well known among Republicans. Sure. I don't think you've had a scenario where you've had a former vice president running against a former president in probably about 150 years, when at that time you actually had candidates who the United States would take the top two choices and put the number two, so they didn't run as a ticket. So this is pretty unprecedented territory for all of us. All right, Marc Short, thank you so much. We'll continue to follow the campaign over the coming months.